It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there rustling through his notes. I'm Craig Hoffman. I can rustle through some of my notes too. Just a little paper.
Russell.
Oh, no, there's no Russell on this podcast. He's on 1-4 on the Team 980. So today we will preview this monster game between the Ravens and the Commanders. Very interesting Baltimore team for sure. They've had kind of a wacky year compared to, I think, what a lot of people thought they would be. I think some of the stats would tell you there's some really big opportunities for the Commanders in this game. The tape belies that I won't say belies it, but it colors in some of the details. I know, by the way, around all of that with their defense that's ranked 31st and yada, 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 they have the two-time MVP in Lamar Jackson. And I don't think you need stats, Logan, to say that he's very, very good at football. There's also kind of the hype element of this. And it was kind of where we started last week. And I think it's probably worth just quickly touching on again. This is the game of the week in the NFL. Nance Romo calling it for CBS, like it's getting all the coverage on all the morning shows. You have the Lamar Jayden comparisons. Quinn and Daniels were asked about all that stuff on Wednesday. I for lack of a better term, Logan, how annoying is it as a player to have these kinds of questions being the ones that's asked? Or are you like, hey, this is cool because people are actually paying attention to us?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate in this regard because I hate this kind of stuff that no one would ask me about this kind of thing. Like they would ask me technical questions, X's and O's, like situational stuff, Kime and everyone on the beat. And everywhere I went, that was kind of my MO as a person if you want to ask questions too. But in terms of storylines, I'm not a big in season as a player. I was never a big like storylines guy. Like I tried to kind of block that out as much as possible because I think it's distracting. And I'm sure it's a little bit distracting for Jayden to have to answer it, but I think to his credit, he does a really good job of handling kind of all the adversity and noise that the media and that the NFL kind of conjures up. And it's important that they conjure it up because it gets fans engaged. It gets people watching the game. It gets people tuned into the product. So I'm not saying that. I'm not, kind of being negative on that, but I am saying it can be a little bit distracting. I think you need the right kind of team to be locked in around this kind of stuff and just be like, hey, no one thought we were going to be here. No one loved us when we were starting the season, and now all of a sudden we won some games and everyone wants to ride in our coattails. And I think if I'm Dan, that's probably the message I'm giving. But in terms of the circus, this is where it gets hard. You need a very mature team to kind of handle this kind of stuff and be locked in.
I thought the way Dan answered the question at the press conference, and I presume this is how he's actually handling it internally, was phenomenal. And you were with Dan, obviously, in Atlanta, so you've seen some semblance of this. Although you arrived the year after, I guess they went to the Super Bowl. So, I'm be curious how he handled, that year as Ryan's having the MVP season and all that kind of stuff. But he said, I try to just make it about us, right? I don't try to talk about, Lamar's doing this, the Ravens are doing that, the matchup. It's like Sunday will come on Sunday. We got to have a great Wednesday. Today, this is what we do. This is how we go about it. And Jayden was very, very similar. I don't know whether that's Sean and the PR team doing a great job prepping those guys for the press conference. If so, Sean, you did a good job. Congratulations, buddy. Or whether it is, all due respect to Sean, I think this is how those guys operate. Like Dan is like, I gotta have a good practice today. Kliff and Joe are like, I got to have a good practice today. Jayden is like, I got to get to the facility. At the time I get to the facility, do my work and go about my business because that's how I'm going to be successful. And it's not, hey, it's Ravens week. This is a big game. I've been getting there at 4 a.m. Now I'm going to get there at 3:45 to make a point. It's like, no, I get there at 4 a.m. I do my work and it works for me. And so you make it about you. And yes, you have this big thing looming and maybe it's somewhere in the back of your mind, but if you just make it about your process day to day, it's a really easy way to stay focused and not get too caught up on the bigger stuff. Because also when you're working, like nobody's asking you, like, yes, you have the press conference, but outside of that, then you're back to work and you don't have to deal with that stuff.
No, that's 100% right. I think I'm glad you brought up the process because as a player and when I was on good teams, that was the one thing that always grounded you. It's Wednesday, we're doing Wednesday stuff. It's Thursday, we're doing Thursday stuff. It's Friday, we're doing Friday stuff, irrespective of the opponent. And the coaches on the good teams I was a part of, I think back to the 2012 team, were always excellent at that. So I think it's good that they've already shown some levels of maturity. I think it's great that Dan's been there. You already alluded to that. He's been in some pretty high leverage media moments and handled those really well. So I think it's all good stuff. But I do think we talked about this after the Cleveland game in our review show on Tuesday. And I think one of the things that sticks out to me is just, this is going to show how mature this team is, because you can say all the right things, but your actions on Sunday are going to be the things that show where you're mentally at. And if they struggle a little bit, they're not quite where we thought they were. They're not quite ready, but that doesn't mean they're a bad football team. It just means they've got some more growing to do and some more maturing to do in terms of kind of the intangible stuff. But I'm really excited for the game. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. I think the more I prep for this, the more interested I became in the game, which happens every single week. And I really just can't wait to see. I'm on the media train. I'm on the hype train myself. So looking forward to it.
The one other thing I'll just add real quick on kind of the stakes and how this thing plays out from the mentality / narrative standpoint, right, is after week 1 when they lost, Quinn was basically like, obviously we don't want to lose, but if we learn the lessons from this, it'll be okay. And I do think that there's a possibility this turns into a lesson game for them. I think that there's also a chance that they win. I've said this on the radio a couple of times this week, Logan. I think the range of outcomes here is blowout to blowout, if you will. I could see a world where the Ravens obviously win by a lot. I think the most likely outcome is this is a close competitive game and one of the two teams obviously wins. But I do think there's a situation with a couple of key variables where the Commanders win in a blowout as well. So with that on the table, anything could happen here. What lessons do you take from it? But if it does turn into the blowout by Baltimore of Washington, if they take the proper lessons, which my guess would be there's an intensity to these big moments that a lot of these guys haven't been in. And it's oh, that's what that's like. I'll be ready for it next time. On top of whatever more football specific things that they have. I think this could be a huge moment to build for them. That either they're going to prove that they're already up for that and they're ready, or they're not. And if they learn the lesson, then it's fine in the long term. So that's not preemptively saying, "Hey, nothing bad can possibly happen this weekend," because obviously they would have to follow through and learn the lesson. But the fact that they bounced back so dramatically and so emphatically after Tampa, I think is a great sign and gives me great hope that no matter what happens on the field this weekend, this will be good for this team moving forward.
Yeah, and I think you already said, to me, the main thing is what you talked about after the Tampa game. As long as they learn something from it, win, lose, or draw, this is a good football team. Because once you get past Baltimore, I hate to look ahead of the schedule, but I was talking to Fred and Santana about this, and you got Carolina, you got New Orleans, you got the Bears, it's not the same caliber of team that we're seeing in Baltimore this weekend. And Baltimore,
it's them in Pittsburgh. That's
right.
that in your division games. Those are the tough games left. That's
right.
it. And we're only in week 5.
Yeah, and I think so. I do think, like you said, if you learn something from this, and I think you make the playoffs winning 10 games, and not that that's the goal. You want to make sure you're the best version of this team moving forward. You're laying the foundation the correct way. We don't want to rush the process just because we're accelerated in terms of timeline and timetable with Jayden Daniels, this development, all that kind of stuff. But I do think this is a cool game. This is a cool game for fans. It's a cool game for players. It's a cool game for coaches because there's no better metric, in my opinion, of telling you exactly where you're at. You're playing a Baltimore team that stomped the Bills, that stomped the Cowboys, that was toe-to-toe with Kansas City for a long time and lost on the last play of the game. This is a team that is a Super Bowl caliber, playoff caliber team. And so if you want a good measuring stick, I hate to say it, but the teams we've played prior to this outside of Tampa Bay are flawed teams. Even Cincinnati. Cincinnati's one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL right now, but they are not ready in terms of what they're presenting on the defensive side of the football. You look at Cleveland. We talked about all their shortcomings offensively. You look at Arizona, and while I think Kyler Murray is a special player, he's not an elite quarterback in the NFL at the moment because of his inability to consistently win from the pocket. So there's all these things now. To the thing you always say is they answered those tests every single week, and this one in Baltimore is unique because offensively, they're special. They're like the second-ranked offense in the NFL. Defensively, are they a perfect group? No, but they do some really good things and they're going to be a little bit more consistent than a Cleveland, than a Cincinnati. And so I think it's just a really good measuring stick in an environment, like you said, it's the game of the week. It's a shift. And when you are playing a good opponent in the midst of a shift. The rest of the NFL is taking notice. It's just a great opportunity to learn, to get the experience, all the things we talked about. So kind of win, lose, or draw. I'm excited for this game. I hope they come out with a win. And if it's a loss, I hope it's toe-to-toe. We're bloodying each other's nose for four quarters. Like one of those types of games where we're competitive, we're in it. There's adversity, we handle it, and we show kind of the moral maturity of this team, which would be great. So,
no doubt about it. All right, so let's get into the matchup. Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson. Let's take a look at the Washington offense, one of the best units in the league so far this year. The league's top scoring offense against a Baltimore defense that, on paper, says you can score on us. Cincinnati sure did. They are the 31st ranked pass defense in the league, Logan. And by the way, I should just mention, Commanders averaging 31.6 points per game. Remember, they had never scored 30 points in back-to-back weeks since 2015, and now they are averaging over 30 a game through 5 weeks of the season. Kind of wild that how quickly things can turn. So when you watch the Baltimore defense, are the stats real, if you will, or when you break it down kind of per play, and once the score is not lopsided one way or the other, or how do you view this Baltimore defense?
Well, that's the thing. Maybe I'm skewed because I always start my prep by listening to some local podcasts, and it's coming off the Cincinnati game, and everybody is talking about, all these Baltimore podcasts are talking about how terrible they are in the back end and how guys should be fired and guys should be cut and they need to move in a different direction. And then I go and you start watching the film, and you start early in the season with Kansas City, and I think that group did a pretty good job against Kansas City. I think they held them, I think it was 25 points, something like that. It was a very close game. Obviously came to the score at the end of the game. In the Las Vegas game, they're up big. They're up by, it's 16-3, 16-6 or something like that, well into the fourth quarter. And then all of a sudden there's kind of a couple explosive plays. There's a turnover in the third quarter by Lamar Jackson, get you back in it. But I'm like, the defense that's 6 points going into the fourth quarter. Like that's an NFL football team. That's a great job. You look at what they did to the Cowboys. It's 21-3 midway through the third quarter. And everyone knows how that game ends. It ends 28-25, and there's an onside kick at the end of the game. But it doesn't really jive to me, the statistical numbers. And look at what they did to the Bills. And obviously, you watch that Cincinnati game, and that's one of the best games I've seen by a quarterback in Joe Burrow in probably 5 years. He was in his bag. He's got tremendous players on the outside. Gesicki's making plays. Chase is making plays. Higgins is making plays. Yeah. It was a masterclass, and Joe Burrow was excellent. But in the critical moment, they were able to get a pick and give the opportunity, let Lamar go down and score, tie the game, and they went on a field goal in overtime. So in terms of that kind of stuff, I feel like they're playing better than maybe people think. I do think they're not as good as they've been in years past. They're definitely not as good as they were last year. And I think maybe that's where the disconnect comes, is there's a little bit of air. There's a little bit of kind of communication issues. Like there's a catch that Brock Bowers has in the Las Vegas game where he's running like a sail, kind of this inside stem corner, and they just drop him completely. And there's no one around him for 50 yards.
They dropped Worthy in week 1 against Kansas City. Yeah, there's quite a few of those.
There's a couple of those. But then also in the same game, Las Vegas, for example, there's Adams making 2 tremendous catches that only he can make. And you're kind of like, well, the DB's in excellent coverage, and I don't know if I would coach him to do anything differently here. I will say the pass rush has not been quite as consistent as it was last year. Last year they were doing all this crazy fire zone, blitz replace type stuff, and it was really, really kind of high level, complicated stuff. They were the best defense in football, or second best defense in football per points, and this year they're not that. But I don't think they're a bad defense. I think, the corners on the outside, Brandon Stevens, Marlon Humphrey doing a great job. Nate Wiggins, the rookie, is very, very athletic. They're in tight coverage. They play in a little bit more man than I was expecting. They get into cover 3 structures a little bit. I think maybe that's the thing that kind of jumps out to me in watching them, is I think they're pretty good, but they do play more simplistic coverage structures than I was expecting. Like last year, you're always like, what are they in? Like it's first down. Like I don't know what coverage this is until like 3 seconds into the play. You're like, oh, there's the post safety. Now they're in more traditional, like there's cover 3, there's cover 2, we're in man. And do they do some of the fire zone stuff? Yeah, but it's definitely not with the same frequency. And I think that's where you see the disconnect. They still have good players. They're still pretty productive. They still have a relatively good pressure rate. But it's not what it was last year. And I think that's maybe why the local media in Baltimore is kind of like up in arms about it, is because they're expecting the best defense in the NFL. And I think when it's all said and done, this probably settles in somewhere between 15 and 21, in my opinion, at the end of the season. But they are learning. It's a new defensive coordinator. They are going through some different stuff, and it's a different defense. But they still play hard. They still play physical. And when you look at the game flows, like they're dominant in some of these first halves, and then in the second half when they're throwing the ball a lot, there's some chunk plays that get these other teams back in it. So that's where I'm having a hard time kind of navigating who they are, because it really is kind of a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of affair in some of these football games.
So I think when you look at it, there's the obvious brain drain. Not only did they lose Mike McDonald to be the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, who was their DC last year, they lose Anthony Weaver, who was in the mix here to be DC, who ultimately goes to Miami. They lose Denard Wilson, who was their key guy on the back end, who goes and becomes the defensive coordinator in Tennessee. So you lose 2 defensive coordinator caliber brains and your defensive coordinator who becomes a head coach. And you replace them with a 34-year-old in Zach Orr, who is obviously not very experienced because he's my age. Hard to be experienced as an NFL position coach, play caller, coordinator when you're 34. So there is that obvious downturn in coaching talent, even if the guys that they have might wind up being great coaches eventually. You're still on the front end of the learning curve. I think the other big point of frustration in talking to some folks up there, we did a crossover segment live on the radio with the afternoon show on our sister station 105.7 The Fan yesterday, including Jason Lockenfora, who's a name I'm sure you know, Logan, longtime NFL insider with CBS, who now is doing local radio in Baltimore in his hometown. They are very frustrated, I think, by the explosives. That is the thing. And if I was the coaching staff, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. Because they have given up those miscommunication type explosives, just free touchdowns. Can't do that and win in the NFL on a consistent basis, or certainly unless you have Lamar Jackson making up for it on the other end. And then the other thing is the tackling. And so sometimes the coverage, I think, is pretty solid, but they miss tackles. They are third worst in the NFL in yards after catch allowed. Now, they also gave up about 70 yards of yak in one play to Jamar Chase last week, so that's slightly inflated based off one play made by the second best receiver in football behind Justin Jefferson. And so like that is something worth considering, but like they have had some issues there. And so I think it becomes an interesting question of, if you're Kliff, how do you then put their defense in conflict, especially in the areas of the field where they've struggled to communicate, and how do you deploy the screen game and some of the in-breaking routes, et cetera, to get your receivers and backs on the move, knowing that you're facing a team that might have trouble bringing them down?
Yeah, and so I think, obviously I watched probably more film than I have, because I had a hard time like really quantifying like what this was. And when you watch early, you're like, man, these guys are tackling well. They're pretty consistent. I think where the missed tackles show up for me is there is more air in the secondary, especially when they're playing zone. So guys will catch a crosser and there's not a guy within 4 yards of them. So it's a little bit of... It doesn't
feel like the second level is really carrying their water in the passing game.
I mean, it's kind of both, honestly. Like, Roquan Smith's not playing as well as he did last year. They've got him kind of doing some different stuff in terms of being a pass rusher, dropping out from the line of scrimmage. They have this really interesting kind of third down package where it's odd spacing. So there's a nose guard, there's 2 defensive linemen lined up over the offensive tackles, kind of on the outside shoulder, maybe 5 techniques. Then they've got 2 kind of stand-up players on the inside, and they kind of drop those guys out, or they'll work them on games. But that's what Roquan Smith is doing. And I've never really thought of him as an elite pass rusher. Like, obviously he's a good blitzer, but from that alignment, he's not going to be as effective, in my opinion. So that's a little bit weird to me, I think. And again, like I said, I think the corners in man situations do a decent job. Like they're pretty sticky. You know what I mean? Like it's not like when you watch like every game, there's, like I said, Devontae Adams had 2 catches against when they played Las Vegas, and there's a player that could not be closer to him. It's like they're in perfect phase. And I think when you watch, when I watch them versus CeeDee Lamb, like they're in good coverage, they're in tight phase, they're in competitive down. It's the zone stuff where they don't look like they're quite worked out. There's like they gave up a couple seams to Dallas. They gave up a seam to they gave up a couple completions to Brock Bowers, and obviously that's a crazy mismatch in terms of who you're putting on him with. If it's a linebacker, like he's going to win that every time. So I don't know. I know statistically they're not where they've been, and when you watch the film, they're not where they've been. But by any stretch of the imagination, I don't think they're a bad defense. I think the other thing that I think has been surprising to me is kind of the limited nature of their pass rush. Like when they don't blitz, they're having a hard time creating pressure, and it really feels kind of like Washington did when Chase and Montez, so like 2 years ago, when the defense was supposed to be really good, but they couldn't quite figure it out. There were some struggles in the back end. It feels a little bit like that, where the coaching on the back end isn't where it needs exactly to be. And like you said, they're going to grow into that. The pass rush diversity in terms of line stunts and blitzing isn't quite there. But like I said, I think this group, when it's all said and done, is going to fall somewhere between 15 and 21, kind of a middle of the pack group. And I think that's how they've been playing. Like you said, they give up explosive plays, which is not acceptable, and that's tough for defenses. And I think that's one of the reasons they lose the Las Vegas game. But I think I don't want fans to go into this game thinking this is a defensive pushover. I think it's just they're figuring some stuff out in ways that they haven't been, kind of in the modern Baltimore era. Because, again, like this is not what you expect when you turn on Baltimore film. Like they don't have those big hulking defensive linemen. They've got Betabike, who's a smaller kind of shifty guy. They've got, Travis Jones, who's a bigger dude, but kind of more of a finesse player. It's a little different when you watch it. And so if you take the Raven off the helmet, I think you kind of say, oh, this is like a fine defense, but it's not the Ravens and what they've been. And I think that's where the local fan base gets a little bit like pissed off, because they're used to excellence, and rightfully so, because that's what that brand's been there for a long time. But I don't think this is a bad defense. I just don't think it's a good defense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they do some interesting stuff too. Obviously, Kyle Hamilton, they move around a lot because he's Kyle Hamilton, and that's what Kyle Hamilton does. He's everywhere. He moves himself around. He's where's the ball? That's where Kyle Hamilton is. They also have taken Marlon Humphrey and moved him into the slot, where he's probably best. In sometimes he's out, like in 2 receiver or 2 corner sets, he's still on the field. He's outside. But then I think it's Wiggins. Stevens, I think, is on the field most of the time. Wiggins then comes in and plays outside, and then Humphrey slides inside. So, if, say, they wanted to get Terry on their slot corner and do some of the matchup stuff, that becomes Marlon Humphrey, which is a little bit bigger of a challenge, although he has given up some plays, as they all have this year. But that also means that you could get Terry on a rookie. And Nate Wiggins is playing well, especially for a rookie. But, hey, let's get in an 11 personnel, make sure that Humphrey's slid inside, and then we know that we're getting a 2 or a 3 corner on Terry McLaurin. So there's a chance, I think, to get some of the matchups. They also don't blitz a lot. They're 26th in the league in blitz percentage per next gen stats.
It's weird.
And I wonder how
they don't have like a defensive identity. I'm sorry to cut you off, but like when you watch them, you're like, you should do this more, but like, why are you doing this? Like, this is, it just,
because like Hamilton's a great blitzer.
Yeah. And he has a bunch of sacks and a lot of pressures, and he's done a great job. I forget what, he had a game where he ran down the quarterback, and it was like this crazy, I think it was against Josh Allen, like ran him down, made an excellent play. And you're kind of like, this seems like what you want to be living in, a little bit more of this kind of stuff, especially on third down. And also I just kind of wonder if the game flow, I know that's kind of like a bad word, but they've been up big in the second half of a lot of these games, late in the games. And I wonder if that's changed kind of, Zach Orr's approach in terms of how he's calling the game. I think you do see a little bit more too high. I think you do see a little bit more soft zone. And in those soft zones, like we talked about, there's going to be some space because they're still figuring some of that stuff out. So, obviously he's learning as a defensive coordinator, but it is interesting to watch, kind of to your original point there. Like, what are you guys good at? And because I don't really know, you're kind of okay at a lot of stuff. And there's games where they play a ton of man. There's games where they play more zone. There's games where they blitz a little bit more. But I don't. I think that's the other thing. Like, who are you? And I think that's why it's so hard to classify this defense and what they do well.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I think that, the question then becomes, how do they play Jayden? And the good news for them is they practiced for 2 straight months against Lamar in training camp. So that's a little bit helpful. They have, some discipline to them. That is kind of the Ravens way. But those soft zones that they're not quite as good at, that's probably what you want to play against Jayden, to be able to keep your eyes on him. Make sure that he doesn't get out. What do you see, like when they play a quarterback like Allen? Obviously, they had a great game against Buffalo. Really thoroughly beat them into the ground. But like, what do you see in terms of their ability to contain Jayden, both as a thrower and some of the big stuff down the field, but also, Jayden's absolutely killed teams with his legs, just extending plays and picking up easy first downs, and extending drives. Like, are they equipped to deal with that?
Yeah, and I think I'm really glad you brought up the Buffalo game, because I really thought that was kind of an exquisite performance by Zach Orr, in the sense that he really seemed to understand how that offense ticked. And so in a lot of their like zone pressure looks and a lot of their kind of like stems pre-snap, they basically were like, we're not going to let you throw a lot of quick game. And it really got Allen off of his rhythm and off of his cadence, and he kind of started running around more. And they have a defense that tackles well enough and has enough athletes like Kyle Hamilton you talked about, who can kind of match that athletic quarterback. And I really thought in that game specifically, he understood exactly what it meant to limit that Buffalo offense. And there's a lot of similarities, honestly, between Buffalo and the Commanders. I think you could say, hey, we've been really successful running a lot of quick game. I think when you watch the Cleveland game, that's one thing I thought Schwartz did a good job of, was basically been like, hey, man, you're going to have to throw it over the top. Like, we're not going to let you kind of dink and dunk us and throw for 85% completion percentage like you did versus Arizona. We're going to play man. We're going to be nice and tight. You're not going to run the football. You're going to have to throw it over the top. And I honestly think that worked really well. You know what I mean? Like, especially for the first 3 or 4 drives. Because and this is another thing that kind of come back to, is one of the things this defense has that Cleveland's defense doesn't have, or Arizona's defense doesn't have, is they have one of the best offenses in football. So if you kind of operate under a similar game flow to what Cleveland did, where it's a 3 and out, and all of a sudden, Baltimore has 14 points because, Derrick Henry has a 60-yard run and Lamar Jackson throws for a touchdown, that's going to really limit what we can do offensively. But in terms of what I think is responsive would be, I think in terms of the best thing that I've seen work against Jayden, it's pressures early, take away the zone read, and play good man-to-man coverage on the outside. And I think they do have the corners to do that. I know that locally they probably don't think that, but when you watch Brandon Stevens, when you watch Marlon Humphrey, when you watch Nate Wiggins is not a tackler by any stretch of the imagination, but he's probably one of the better pure cover players in the NFL. So I think they probably say, hey, let's match it up. Let's play man-to-man coverage. Let's keep more guys in the box. Let's keep more eyes on Jayden and force him to beat us deep. And I'm not sure with this coverage group that that's going to be as easy as it was last week, especially given what Baltimore's offense can do in terms of moving the football.
Yeah. They're fantastic against the run. And that's the other part of this, is we tend to, because Jayden's so important to this team now and in the future, we spend a lot of time talking about how he's going to play, when the reality is this offense is built kind of run and then everything off of that. And Baltimore's been fantastic against the run. They're top 10 or top 5 in the league in a lot of the EPA per rush and all those kinds of statistics. Also, like yards before contact. Like, they're making contact with guys at the line of scrimmage all the time, so you're not getting a great push. So there's a lot of really good stuff that team is doing. My question is, do they have, like, one thing that Cleveland was able to do on the zone read quarterbacks, run stuff is, they were like, we're going to force you to pull, and we know that Owusu-Koramoah can run with Jayden Daniels. Well, at least they thought. There's a couple times where he got more tired that it didn't work out so well, but early in that game, it did. They had a good plan where it's like, we're going to force you to make a decision, and then we're going to try to hit your quarterback. Kyle Hamilton's a lot of things. I don't know if, like, is he going to win a foot race with Jayden Daniels? Not necessarily. So that is something where I wonder how they play the zone read stuff, and if Kliff has kind of a curveball off of that, a change up off of that, whether it's some of the RPO and like, hey, let's pull it, but let's throw, let's get a guy to the flat and try to have a dump off option. I'm very curious to kind of see how involved the quarterback run game is, especially if one, B-Rob is still banged up. He was a DNP on Wednesday, although I'm sure he'll play a la last week. And two, Baltimore is probably better suited to stop this run game, the traditional running back run game, than any team that they played so far this year.
Yeah, and they stop it a little bit differently. We talked about Matabike, how he's not been necessarily that productive in the pass game, but he is explosive in the run game. He's quick, and he does create a lot of penetration, and he is very disruptive versus the run. Travis Jones, again, he's a big guy from UConn a couple years ago, kind of more traditional nose. Michael Pierce is his backup, and Michael Pierce might be, in my estimation, probably a top 10 run-stopping defensive tackle. I mean, dude weighs like 430 pounds, but he can like move. He's got like ballerina feet. So they do have some, and Roquan Smith, I think, is great against the run. Trenton Simpson's really interesting because he's a 4'4" kind of linebacker from Clemson a couple years ago that can really run. But they're trying to figure out, to me, the best way to utilize him, because on first and second down, he's pretty good. He's pretty downhill. He can run sideline to sideline well. Not overly instinctive in terms of coverage, and I think that's one of the reasons you see him kind of playing less, especially with the difficulties they've seen in the pass game. But he's a guy that I think it would be an interesting matchup for Jayden. And you mentioned Kyle Hamilton, and I know Kyle Hamilton ran like a 4.7 or something like that, but when you watch him on the field, he doesn't
so much faster.
Play that way. Yeah. He's very instinctive. He takes good angles. Like, he ran down Josh Allen twice. And Josh Allen is a legit 4.5 guy. At least that's what he was timed at. So I think they have weapons. Dafe Owe, I think he ran a 4.3 at Penn State's pro. Like, they got some dudes who can run around and move a little bit. And I think you talked about this. Like, what are they going to do to stop the quarterback run game? I think they're going to have something in the bag because they see it every day. When I was watching Baltimore's rushing attack, I was like, this is so similar to what the Commanders are doing right now from a quarterback run standpoint. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to their offense. But they're going to have a plan for the zone read because they see it every day. And as good as Jayden is at running it, like, Lamar's better. So they're going to have a good standard of how and what they need to do to take stuff away. And I think it's probably going to look something very similar to what Cleveland did, because they do have, like I said, Trenton Simpson, I think, would be a great matchup for Jayden Daniels in terms of for them, because he can run and he's a good hitter and he's physical, he's a good tackler. And they have athletic, instinctive defensive ends that can move around. Kyle Van Noy's been around for a long time, but got great movement skills. They can run that little gap exchange like we talked about. So I think the wrinkle, to your point, is going to be really interesting. And I think, some of the stuff that Kyle used to do with Robert should come to the forefront this week. So for example, if you're going to gap exchange a zone read, so that means the defensive end's going to crash and the linebacker is going to play out over the top.
Right. So when the defensive end crashes, it looks like hey, that's the unblocked player. I got to pull it. There's going to be nobody home. And then all of a sudden they're planning for that. So they have a linebacker come greet you in the hole.
Yeah. So, and essentially he becomes like the B gap. So the A gap is between the center and the guard. The B gap is between the guard and the tackle. And obviously the C gap is outside the tackle. But that defensive end goes from the C gap defender to the B gap defender. And so what Kyle used to do is give them the zone read look, but just have the tight end come and just cut that dude down. So now you have two guys in the C gap, and there's a huge lane open for the runner. And I think I remember seeing in 2021, Kliff utilizing that a little bit. So if they're going to do that, I would say, like, let's run some Wanda, open side run away from the tight end with the tight end sifting back and cutting that dude down. Get them to stop doing it, which is going to make our zone read stuff a little bit more effective. And again, they do have guys that are athletes at end, so they could play the surf technique like Cincinnati did, and I thought they did a good job of that until they didn't do a good job with it, and Jayden's able to score a touchdown. But I think those are some tools I would probably expect to see throughout this game. And the other thing I'd expect to see is like receivers in the run blocking surface and making sure they're blocking some of these guys, because that's another way you can change gaps and mess with defensive lineman fits. So I think there are a lot of tools, and hopefully we see them this week from Kliff. And I have every expectation, like we talked about after the Arizona game. I thought Anthony Lynn did a great job of kind of having some very specific game plan runs in that presented some problems for them. So really excited to see what that looks like. And there are some solutions that they could use. And I'm sure, obviously they've been doing this all week, so they probably have some better solutions than that even on deck. So
yeah, no, I'm excited to see it, and because as you said, like, you're not wrong to say, like, oh, Cleveland did some good stuff. Oh, other teams did some good stuff. Until it doesn't work.
Until it doesn't work, right?
Because Jayden and company have scored 30 plus. How many have weeks in a row. Like, yeah, Cleveland did some good stuff until they dropped 1,000 points on them in the second quarter. And they were up, 24, whatever it was at halftime, and scored 34 in a game where the starting quarterback didn't play the fourth quarter. So you can do some good stuff. The problem is, and this has been Baltimore's problem, which is what gives me, I think, some hope for Washington to have another really productive day offensively, is you can do some good stuff down in, down out. And if you ruin it with explosive plays, it's ruined. And so that is going to be the key, I think, for Washington. Get some explosive plays. How they do that, well, that's why Kliff gets paid all that money. He and his friends can figure that out. Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. And it's time to talk about Lamar Jackson and his friends, and how the Commanders can try to contain one of the most potent offenses, who, by the way, is coming off a mega week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Needed every single yard, every single point to get to overtime, and then ultimately they win after they get kind of a fluky opportunity, a bad snap that sets up an opportunity, but they took advantage. Credit to them. Derrick Henry gets out for 50 yards, and then Justin Tucker, that's chip shot for him. So they come off the win. Like, Lamar is the obvious answer here, but like, why is Lamar so dangerous? What about him is so unique? And what if you're Joe Witt Jr., what are you trying to shut down and kind of like force them into the box you want, and then pray that Lamar doesn't blow up that box?
Yeah, so I think this is going to sound insane, but when you watch the film, specifically the Cincinnati film, I think the one thing that if I'm Joe Witt, that I take away from that game is I'm really, 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 really trying to stop the run. Like, that is the first and foremost thing with this team. And and people hear that and they say, oh, well, Lamar's a good passer. Yeah, I know he's a good passer, but they are an excellent team at running the football. So basically, they're so efficient at running the football, it basically replaces all of their like quick game. There's no underneath passing attack really here. It's just like, I can run zone read, I can run GT, I can do like a little jet sweep to Justice Hill. Like, I can do whatever any run you think of, like, we've got it in. I can put Patrick Ricard in the dot. We can have two tight ends in, and we can dent your face mask. Like, they do a lot of stuff, put on a lot of different hats. And I think, I was talking to Dan Quinn yesterday on the Game Plan show, where he kind of previews the matchup the morning of the game. And he was saying, that's one of the reasons training camp is so important. I know everyone wants to get rid of training camp, but it allows us to kind of talk through 21 runs, 22 runs, sub runs, zone read, RPO, all that stuff. And so we've touched on all this stuff because of training camp, but we need to make sure we know it really well, because they do it all, right? And I think that's the thing that is really overwhelming about the rushing attack is it's so diverse. But I think when you look at what Cincinnati did, take something from that book. They were basically like, how many people can we put in the box and feel good covering? Like, let's do that. More people. You from the stands. Let's come in here, stand near the line of scrimmage, and we're going to blitz. We're going to line stunt. We're going to make it hard for you to kind of get consistent looks, because the other thing about it is their offensive line is starting to kind of figure it out. I think that's another reason their offense is playing better. Daniel Falele, that big guard from Minnesota, he played tackle. He's 6'8", he's 400 pounds. Like, him on a double team with Tyler Lindenbaum is scary. Tyler Lindenbaum is one of the best kind of move centers in the NFL. Ronnie Stanley's starting to play like Ronnie Stanley again. They've got a lot of kind of interesting things. They moved, what's his name? Makari, their backup tackle, who is kind of their jack of all trades. He's starting at guard now for them. And the production's just been so much better with him in there. Rosengartner, the guy from Washington, UW, who we all like coming out, starting to play good football for them. So it's all kind of happening for them up front. And I'm just basically like, put more people in there, put more bodies in there, because the two guys on the right side are good athletes, Falele and Rosengartner, but they do make mistakes. They gave up a safety to Cincinnati last week on a mental mistake between the two of them. So I look at that and I say, that's got to be priority number one. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. But that's priority number one. People say, why? Why do you want to do that? Lamar diced them up in the second half of that game. I get it. But the one thing about Lamar that you see when you're watching the film is it's not like this super great rhythm and timing, and we can just dink and dunk and dissect you down the field. He finds big plays, explosive plays, but it takes a lot. He's got to scramble around. He's got to look down the field. Guys get open late. I would prefer that because there's more variability there than Derrick Henry running for 6 yards a pop. Like that's just my thought. I don't want them.
100%.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's where I get to is you got to stop Lamar running the football because he's such a driver of that, and hope that you can kind of mathematically sway your option in this more high leverage passing attack that they have.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with that. And, hey, if Lamar's going to have 2 weeks in a row where he finds 7 big plays, like, okay, he's Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP. It's not off the table. But I'd rather that than set Hutt, turn around, hand the ball to Derrick Henry. Set Hutt, turn around the other way, hand the ball to Derrick Henry, this time with Patrick Ricard in front of him, a 300 whatever pound fullback smashing people's face in. Okay, now fake a handoff to Henry and Lamar's on the edge and he's got, Ronnie Stanley out in front of him. Like, it is a nightmare if you're going to do that stuff. And so I would much rather that. Plus, I think there are opportunities for turnovers with Lamar as a passer. You have to be super disciplined. He does not take sacks. It is crazy, the sack to pressure percentage. He has been pressured. I think it's, let's see, where is it?
50 times.
50, is it 51 pressures. Yeah. He's taken 5 sacks. 51 pressures, taken 5 sacks. So you have to be really disciplined. But if you can get him to throw, he makes bad throws, like from the pocket. Has he grown and does he see the field way better than younger Lamar? Yes. Was some of that always overstated because of how athletic he is and people just wanted to look at that and assume he couldn't play from the pocket? Of course. But to pretend like he is Tom Brady who can also run is also a fallacy. Like, that's not who he is.
Right.
And so you watch some of these bad throws and it's like, well, dang, if you can pick off 1 or 2 of those, like, it changes the entire complex of the game, the entire framework of the game. And so I think that you have to be on your toes for opportunities when you rush him and then force throws. And I think the other thing that really stood out in a couple of these games, specifically like the one that stood out as different was the Buffalo game. They got no pressure on him. And if you let him sit back there with no pressure, he will be Tom Brady from the pocket. He's an NFL quarterback. But if you can get some push, even if you don't if you don't hit him, you don't sack him, whatever, but you just make his feet uncomfortable, you make him, change the arm angle in a way that he doesn't want, make him, kind of feel uncomfortable, that's when he'll throw high. And if he can throw over a receiver right into the arms of Aquan Martin, like, sick, there's your pick. Get 2 of those and you've got yourself a great chance to win the football game.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Cowboys game, when you look at the Bills game, kind of their 2 most physically dominant wins, like, he threw for under 200 yards. And I think that's where they want to live. Like if I'm the coach, I'm saying, like, this is who he can be because of, and again, it's not like he's not playing when they're running the football. He's the engine that drives their rushing attack because it adds so much flexibility and diversity. Like, obviously we talked about, Picard and Henry and being physical and being big, and there's some absolutely disgusting plays of Picard just killing a safety, and then Derrick Henry stiff arming some guy, and you're just like, they don't play football like this anymore, and teams aren't built to stop this anymore. But then in the next play is a fake handoff to Derrick Henry, a fake reverse to Justice Hill. We're running GD to the offensive right, and Lamar I don't know what he ran, but he looks like he's running a 4.2 out there and runs for 15 yards for a first down. And you're just like, how do we match this? And so when you watch him versus Cincinnati, when you watch him when he's a little bit stressed out, because they were down going into the 4th quarter there, and he had to do some pretty miraculous stuff to get them back in it.
And credit to him, he did.
He did it. Like, and so we're saying, like, he is good at football. He's an excellent football player. He can throw, he can run, he can do it all. But when I watch him, I see a guy who's an offense that's much more efficient when they're efficient running the football. When he's got to get back there and throw, it's not on time. It's not. I don't think he does. This is not to say he doesn't see it well. It's just kind of a little bit out of rhythm, and a little bit of it.
The receivers aren't great.
And I was just about to say that.
Good. Bateman, by the way, who's banged up and might not even play in this game. Like, he's okay. Yeah,
so I was just about to say that, like, and this is a really kind of fundamental, like, nerdy football thing, is their best players are the tight ends. Charlie Kolar, Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, right? Like, those are the guys. Zay Flowers is a good piece. What they do a good job of with the run game is stretching you horizontally. When you watch them, they have a really, really hard time because they don't have that dog wide receiver of stretching you vertically. So everything gets a little bit tight near the line of scrimmage, especially if you can't run the football. All of a sudden, the windows get small. The timing's a little bit weird. You got to hold the ball a little bit longer because you're waiting for Isaiah Likely to run this deep crosser or attack the seam, and it's different. And so versus the Bills, I thought they did a good job of using Zay Flowers, not as an underneath kind of screen option guy, but kind of get the top off the defense a little bit, and it created more space underneath. But they don't do that all the time. And so I prefer, because the passing attack is not, it's good, but it's not the Cincinnati Bengals. Take away the run, force him to throw. It's still hard. He's still an MVP caliber player.
It's the best option, even if you would never if you could pick the Browns pass game to play against, you pick that 11 times out of 5. We understand what we're saying here. It's just you got to pick something, and that's what you'd pick.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately what you get to, because again, it's not always on time, it's not always on rhythm, it's not always the most accurate, but can he still make explosive plays? Yeah, I mean, I've watched that play. The play where he stiff arms Sam Hubbard twice and delivers it to Isaiah Likely is maybe the best football play I've ever seen. He's the one player in the NFL currently that can make that play. Yeah, so obviously he's going to get his no matter what you do, but in terms of just easier relatively, in both things being hard comparatively, that's the one you're choosing.
Yeah. Two more things real quick that I wanted to hit on. One is that they are really conservative on first down, because when you can rush for 6 yards a carry, which is, by the way, what they're averaging as a team this year, 6.1 yards a carry
is that?
Through 5 games is nuts. So they just run the ball a lot, but they also play action off. First down is going to be a run or a play action, which also kind of sucks, because even if they run it 8 times, that play action could be the one that kills you. Right. So good luck guarding that. But it does leave them into some second and longs, and then ultimately some third and longs. The thing I think is interesting about that is they are ridiculously aggressive on third down. Yeah. They will sit, because Lamar is so good at not taking sacks, and because he has such a knack for generating big plays, especially on the second play, if you will, when the play gets extended. They'll run guys vertical on third down, and it's almost like, when you watch a quarterback who's a young guy who doesn't know what he's doing, except for this time, it's Lamar knows exactly what he's doing. It's just that the receivers aren't going to get open in the first concept. So it's wait, okay, it's been 3 seconds. Let me go extend the play and run around. And he's the best at it in the whole league. If there's a ton of space, he'll run. If not, he will run around and then find someone late in the down, and he can throw any arm angle. He'll throw it as he's leaping out of bounds back across his body and find a completion. But they will create that space on third down vertically, which again, not only you have to cover that because he will make those throws down the field, but if that pulls your coverage players away from the line of scrimmage, that's where he gets a ton of huge scrambles on third down. So I think that's third and long is not a safe space against the Baltimore Ravens, and that is that's a terrifying proposition.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to how good Lamar is and the problems that he presents. You mentioned he's not taking a lot of sacks. His ability to create that second reaction throw is special, and so it's tough. This is a tough team. This is I don't know, maybe Tampa Bay. This is a good offense though. This is a good offense.
Well, you get the version of Tampa that Washington got, and that's tough sledding, because when Baker's on, he thinks he's Tom Brady. Yeah. And you're sure, you can throw the ball in any window and just fire it in there on time, on target. Mike Evans played like a god. It is what it is. But yeah, I mean, from the week in, week out, what you'd expect, I think this is the best one. And the last one, a matchup that scares the daylights out of me. And I was talking to my guy, Ben Solak at ESPN, about this on the radio the other day. And he talked about the variance in the passing game. He's some weeks this is a Flowers week. Some weeks this is an Isaiah Likely week. And he said, sometimes it's a Justice Hill week, and I think this will be a Justice Hill week. I don't know if you're Washington, who the best matchup is, if you're going to go man-to-man and send some pressure and all that kind of stuff for a running back like Justice Hill. Bobby Wagner, for all of the greatness that he has, you're not necessarily wanting him on a running back in space. Do you want to take Frankie out, and is that his deal? Do you use one of your safeties? I think... in these man-to-man situations, against Buffalo, they get him on a linebacker double move touchdown, in the high red. So they know how to use him as a really dangerous weapon in the pass game. And I feel like it's worth mentioning because that is where some of their explosives come from. And I don't know what the best solution is for Washington there.
It's a great point. And this is where it's hard playing defense, because my initial reaction is just play dime. you've got enough really good coverage safeties. Like Percy Butler, I think could cover with him. Yeah, I think he's smart enough. I think he's intuitive enough to get it done. Problem is if you go dime, like
now, Derrick Henry's in there too. They'll just go 22 personnel and kill you.
Yeah, how are you going to stop the run? And I think those are the problems that this team. And even if you don't go 20, let's say you go like 10 or 20 personnel, where it's 2 backs in the game, and one of them's Justice Hill and one of them's Derrick Henry. Like you still have to stop Derrick Henry. Like you still have to do that. And so that's one of the issues that this offense presents, is they do have enough people and enough talent with a good offensive line and an excellent playmaker quarterback that you're always going to be a little bit shorthanded. But I think the thing is, as much as third down is not a safe space, you want to get them in second and long, third and long as much as you can, and because it limits. And they're still going to run the ball because they can get big chunks on 2nd and 10. They're still going to do all the stuff that you're trying to stop them from doing. But you want to kind of make sure that you can tip the deck as much as possible in those situations. So I do feel comfortable playing dime. I do feel comfortable putting Frankie Louvu in a rush spot because I think he can win a one-on-one. If it's first down or whatever it is, and they are inconsistent, good down and distance, like everything's on the table for them, it's going to be really hard to kind of dictate and get the personnel and kind of, again, tip the deck the way you want it to be tipped.
Yeah. For whatever it's worth, Washington, one of the worst EPA per rushes in the league still. They're obviously have given up a lot of explosive plays, but they're also top 5 in the league in stuff percentage. So they'll give up 30 yards and then get you a -2. So, can you eliminate the big ones? Can you just, they can get you to 2nd and 12, but then on 2nd and 12, if they run it again, like don't give up 20. So, easier said than done. Like, duh, thanks. Good job, Coach Hoffman. Nailed that one. You're ready for a DC job. Like that is kind of the balance that Washington has walked this season. Is like, they will make plays, but you can't give up the big ones. And so they've been better about it week over week. Can they do it against one of the absolute best? We'll find out on Sunday.
And that's why this game is going to be so much fun to watch. It's going to be so much fun to watch. So can't wait for it.
You'll be on the sideline, and we'll be talking about it on the tape on Tuesday. We'll have an instant reaction show for you 7:30 on Sunday night on YouTube Live. I'm not sure who's joining me for that one yet, but we are going to do that. I don't know, Logan. Maybe you'll be home in time. It's 7:30. We can, you and I will talk. Maybe it'll be Logan. Who knows? But it will be, because we will go road game timing, if you will. So it will be 7:30 live on YouTube at the Team 980 at 106.7 The Fan, and then we will get it in your podcast feed on the audio as soon as we can after. Other than that, big week still to come. We're recording this Thursday morning, so 2 shows left on the radio for me. Got some good stuff, including Commanders receiver De'Ami Brown joining the show at 4 o'clock today. Working on some other stuff, big guests as well. Potentially either today or tomorrow. So definitely stay tuned for that. Of course, Logan talking with Tana and Smoot and everybody over on their stuff with the Command Center podcast and everything else Logan's doing on the Commanders page. So check that out there. And we'll see you Sunday night back here on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.